Number 3. Rackman. On August 11, 1994, a professional fisherman was working on the Hawkesbury River, which is just north of Sydney. Around noon, he pulled up his net and he made an unusual discovery. It was a makeshift steel cross. A large black plastic sheet and some plastic bags were tied to the cross with some orange rope. Then he noticed that there was a bone sticking out of the bag. At first, he thought it was an animal bone, but he couldn't figure out why someone would tie an animal to a cross like that. So he got a closer look and noticed that it was a human body tied to the cross. The fisherman got in contact with the police, and they collected the body. It is believed that the man had been in the water for a year to 4 years before he was found. Since he had been in the water so long, his body was in terrible condition. Notably, the medical examiner wasn't able to get fingerprints. What the medical examiner was able to determine was that he was between the ages of 21 and 45, and he was 5'2" to 5'4". He had dark hair and his family was probably from the Mediterranean. His face was also somewhat misshapen. He most likely died from blunt force trauma to the head. He was wrapped in a plastic sheet and there were 2 bags over his head. 2 orange ropes were used to tie the man to the cross, one across his neck and one across his torso. The long part of the cross was about 5 feet 9 inches long. The arms were solid cylindrical bars and they were welded on. Attached to the arms were 2 rods of rebar. They were bent in an L shape to hold the body against the cross. The medical examiner couldn't determine if the man was tied to the cross before or after his death. The lead detective on the case said that the thought of the man being tied to the cross and then tortured haunts him. There have been several attempts to identify the victim, only known as Rackman, but DNA and dental records have ruled out every man tested so far. Until he's identified, finding out who murdered him may be next to impossible. Number 2. Margaret and Seana Tapp. In 1985, 35-year-old Margaret Tapp was living with her 9-year-old daughter, Seana, and her teenage son, Justin, in Fern Tree Gully, which is a suburb of Melbourne. On the night of August 7, 1984, the mother and daughter were at home in their beds. Justin was staying at his grandparents' home. Just after 11 p.m., a neighbor said that they heard a muffled scream. Around midnight, neighbors heard the Tapp's dog barking. The next evening, one of the men that Margaret was seeing stopped by the house. He and Margaret were supposed to go to the opera. It was a date that Margaret had planned. He knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. Margaret's car was in the driveway, so he went to the back door. It had a faulty lock, so he was able to get inside. The house was eerily quiet, and there was a horrible odor in the air. First, he went to Margaret's room and found her lifeless body on the bed. He rushed to Seana's room and also found her dead. An autopsy was performed, and the medical examiner determined that Margaret had been beaten and strangled with a rope. Her daughter had also been strangled with a rope, and she had been sexually assaulted. The police concluded that Margaret was probably killed first. She was either attacked while reading a book in bed or after falling asleep while reading. The police think that Maria was killed first because they don't think that she would have let her daughter be attacked without defending her. The police found several pieces of physical evidence in the house. This included 2 sets of hair, 1 strand that is long and blonde, and a few that were short and gray. However, those hairs could have gone there at any time and were not necessarily left by the killer. Besides the hair, they found prints from Dunlop Volley tennis shoes that were left by the killer. Finally, they have DNA from semen that was found on Seana's nightdress. Of course, at the time of the murders, DNA testing had not been invented, so the police could only rely on matching the shoe prints and possibly the hairs. The police had a long list of suspects. One included a former police officer who had feelings for Margaret. The former police officer was much older than Margaret, and he was a friend of her father's. Margaret said that she was annoyed by the man's advances, but apparently she did travel to the man's country property with her daughter and her son to be photographed by the former police officer. Another group of suspects is a family that lived on the same street as the Tapps. The family had 4 boys, and the other neighbors thought that the one boy was very strange. Margaret had let the strange boy wash her car and mow her lawn. Some people in the neighborhood believe that he, or one of his brothers, are responsible for the murders. Another possible suspect stemmed from the house where Margaret lived. Margaret was a nurse and she had romantic relationships with several doctors. One of those doctors was paying for the house. The doctor was married and his wife knew about the affair. One time, Margaret went to their house and begged the doctor to leave his wife and come be with her. Another time she came over, she threw a rock through a window and stripped naked on the yard. The theory is that the wife snapped after she found a sex tape of her husband and Margaret, so she hired someone to kill Margaret. Despite the amount of possible suspects, no one could be physically linked to the crime scene, and the case went cold. Then in July 2008, the police charged a man named Russell John Geisha with the murders. Geisha did not know the Tapps, and he had not been considered a suspect, but the police had the DNA from the crime scene tested, and it matched Geisha. 2 weeks later, the police announced that the DNA sample was contaminated, and they dropped all charges against Geisha. It turned out that Geisha's DNA was tested on the same day, in the same place as evidence from the Tapp murder scene was tested, and this led to cross-contamination. Geisha was officially cleared as a suspect after the evidence was reviewed. Since the screw-up, further DNA testing was done, and it eliminated some of the suspects. This includes the man who found the bodies and the former police officer. Unfortunately, the police have yet to test the DNA from every suspect. Until they find a match to the DNA, the murders of Margaret and Seana Tapp will remain unsolved. Number 1. Maria James. Maria James was the mother of 2 sons, and by 1980 she had been separated from her husband, John James, for some time. Maria lived with her sons, Mark, who was 13, and Adam, 11, in the back of the bookstore that she ran in Thornbury, which is a Melbourne suburb. On the morning of June 17, 1980, 38-year-old Maria made breakfast for her sons. Mark walked to school, and Maria walked Adam to his bus stop. She then went home and called her ex-husband. John was a town clerk in a different town, and when Maria called, he wasn't in his office, so she left a message with his secretary. John called back a short time later, and Maria answered the phone. She told him to hang on a minute because there was someone in the kitchen, and then she put the phone down. As John waited for her to come back to the phone, he heard what sounded like Maria arguing with someone. Then he heard a startled yelp, followed by one person shouting. Then there was silence. What John heard made him uncomfortable enough that he got into his car and drove the 15 minutes to the bookshop. He found the front door to the bookstore locked, so he ran around to the back door. It too was locked. He banged on both doors several times, and when there was no answer, he broke in through a window at the side of the building. Once inside, he called out for Maria, but there was no answer. He walked down the hallway towards Maria's bedroom. The door was open and Maria was lying face up on the floor. Her wrists were bound with twine in front of her, and she had been stabbed many times. John ran out the back door and found a phone. After he called the police, he went back to the bookstore and found a woman inside the store browsing the books. He asked her how she got inside, and she said that the front door was open. The police concluded that when John came into the bedroom, the killer was hiding behind the bedroom door. When John left to call the police, the killer ran out the front door. A woman was driving by the store when John was looking for the phone, and she said that a man splattered with blood ran in front of her car. Another person also saw a man covered in blood running down the street. They both said that he was short, chubby, balding, and he had hairy arms. For unknown reasons, the police decided to use Maria's house as a command center, and they worked out of the house for 2 or 3 months. They would interview suspects there, and even make and store their food and drinks in Maria's kitchen. What they concluded was that Maria was probably killed by someone she knew. They thought this because there was no sign of a break-in, and there were 2 cups of coffee on the table. They also think that Maria tried to get into the bedroom because there was a lock on that door. She was first stabbed from behind as she walked into the bedroom. In total, she was stabbed 68 times with a knife that the killer found in the kitchen. She also suffered blunt force trauma to the head. Her wrists were bound sometime close to death, possibly to move her or to inflict further damage. The police instantly had several promising suspects. One is a man who worked for the telecommunications company, Telecom. He had a friendly relationship with Maria. He was interviewed by the police, and he denied committing the murder. 3 days after the police interviewed him, he died by suicide. In his suicide note, he did not admit to the murder, but he did mention the police interview. The woman driving near the crime scene also picked him out of a police lineup. Another possible suspect was a neighbor of Maria's named Mario. Mario was a loner, and on the morning of Maria's murder, they had gotten into an argument. Mario tried to sell her some comic books, but Maria wasn't interested in buying them. Mario admitted that their conversation got a bit heated, but he denied killing her. The police searched his house and they found a note from a dry cleaner's that was 20 minutes across town. The note mentioned bloodstains on his pants. They also found that the twine in Mario's garden was similar to the twine used to bound Maria's wrist. Those were just a few of the strongest suspects, but unfortunately, no charges were brought against any of them. For years, the case sat cold, and then in 2000, the lead detective was able to get DNA testing on a pillow that was found near Maria's body. They found male DNA, meaning it belonged to the killer. In 2005, the DNA was tested against Mario's DNA, and it wasn't a match. Mario was the prime suspect, and since his DNA wasn't a match, the case froze over. Then in 2013, the case took an unusual turn when a family friend was visiting Mark James. The family friend said she had been following his mother's murder case. She suggested a suspect, Anthony Bongiorno, who was the assistant priest at the Catholic church that the James family attended. The church was a short distance from Maria's home. He was the priest who presided over Maria's funeral. In 1996, Bongiorno was charged with sexually molesting 3 young boys. Each case was tried separately, so it looked like each accusation was an isolated incident. Bongiorno was acquitted in his first 2 trials, so the third case was dismissed. Not long after the family friend's visit, Mark asked Adam if Bongiorno had abused him. Adam, who has cerebral palsy and Tourette syndrome, admitted that Bongiorno had sexually abused him when he was younger. Adam had told one other person about the abuse, his mother. On the morning of the day that she died, Maria told Adam that she was going to call the church and deal with the abuse. Adam never said anything because he was terrified of Bongiorno. The police also didn't interview him because they didn't think he would have anything valuable to say because of his disabilities. The police interviewed Buongiorno several times over the years about the murder. At first, he was asked about anything that Maria may have said in confession. Buongiorno said that he was not allowed to reveal what Maria said in confession, but ultimately claimed that he did not know who the killer was. He was also viewed as a person of interest. His alibi for the time of the murder was another priest named Sean O'Connell. O'Connell told the police that they were at a meeting in a different suburb of Melbourne. O'Connell has since passed away. In one interview, Buongiorno made a few strange claims. He said that Maria was working as a prostitute out of her home. However, the police found absolutely no evidence of this. He also told the police not to believe anything that Adam said. He said that due to his disabilities, he didn't know what he was talking about. This was 6 years before Adam first told his brother about the abuse. Buongiorno died in 2002, and he was buried in an unmarked grave. Then in 2015, the police announced that they cleared Buongiorno as a suspect. They never made it public why they cleared him, but they told Mark that the DNA found at the crime scene did not belong to him. Then in 2017, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation released a podcast called Trace. It is a 5-segment piece on the murder of Maria James, and it had several startling revelations about the case. The first revelation was that, over 30 years after the murder, a man was reading a newspaper account of the murder, and he saw a picture of Buongiorno. He recognized Buongiorno immediately. The man was an electrician, and on the day of the murder, he was doing work at Buongiorno's church. The electrician said that on that day, he saw a man running from the direction of the bookstore towards the church. The man was streaked with blood. The electrician asked the man if he was hurt, and he said he cut himself. The electrician went to get his first aid kit, and the bloody man ran into the church. The electrician didn't think about the incident until 30 years later, when he read about the murder in the newspaper and saw Buongiorno's picture. When he saw the picture, he immediately recognized Buongiorno as the man who was covered in blood. The podcast also introduced another suspect, Thomas O'Keefe, who was the pastor at the church. O'Keefe was known to have a violent temper, and he sexually abused several boys, including Adam James. Another victim was James Shanahan, who was abused in the 1960s. He said that O'Keefe made him attend satanic rituals where 4 people were killed. He said that one thing he remembers is that one victim's hands were bound in front of her. In 2000, Shanahan was paid a settlement by the Catholic Church for the abuse he experienced. The investigator on the case said that he had no reason to doubt Shanahan's story. The police even looked into the possible satanic murders, but they couldn't find any reports of missing people from the time when Shanahan alleges that the sacrifices took place. They say it is possible that Shanahan is telling the truth, but they have no way to verify it. Other victims of O'Keefe said that he would talk about disturbing things like necrophilia and ritual murder. The police never questioned O'Keefe about the abuse or the murder. He died in 1984. The final major revelation revolves around the DNA that was used to clear suspects. The Trace podcast revealed that there was a mix-up at the forensic lab based on human error. The male DNA used to clear the suspects actually wasn't from Maria's murder. Instead, it was from a completely different crime scene. That means for years, the police have been clearing suspects based on the wrong DNA. After the podcast, the police officially admitted to the mistake. Mark James and several other people are worried that the error was actually a cover-up by the Catholic Church. This worry was compounded when it was revealed that a quilt taken from the murder scene was also missing from the evidence locker. The police are currently looking at all remaining evidence from the case to see if they can find any DNA from the killer so that they can hopefully give Mark and Adam James some closure. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please subscribe. We post a new video every Thursday and Sunday. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description below the video. But that's all for now. Thanks again for watching.